Okay, we're back. We're live with the middle way and with Russell Leu, who joins us here from Honolulu. And we're talking about cultural competency in this country. Very important, and it's something that we have to continue to talk about because it's part of diversity. It's part of bringing the country together. It's part of avoiding racism, too. So, Russell, tell me about the scope of the discussion you'd like to have.
Well, today I think we've talked previously about culturally competent Americans. When you go abroad doing business, we live in a globalized world. But I think the discussion today, we're going to really focus on cultural competency in America. Are we on that path? Why is it urgent? Why do we need to get it on path? It's a very important issue. This word has been, concept has been talked about since the 1970s, 80s, 90s. But now there's some flashpoints in the country, like the George Floyd trial and the murder and conviction. A lot of things are going on, and this is important that we really have to, really as a country, maybe the leadership has to do something more about it.
Yes. Okay. Leadership. Yes. Leadership is everything, really. We have found that in the transition between Trump and Biden, haven't we? So the question is, what is cultural competency? I mean, of course, it seems to include the whole thing about not being biased, not being bigoted, not being prejudiced, not being tribal, as we have become over the course of the Trump administration. But what is it in your view? What is cultural competence?
Well, covered culture encompasses many different terms, and they all get confused. First of all, we talk about the word nationality, where'd you come from? We talk about race, your immutable physical characteristics, your genes, your hair color, your skin color. We talk about ethnicity, okay, which refers to more behaviors and customs. And we talk about culture, which really is about a person's learned beliefs, your environment, your thoughts and behavior. So all of these things are wrapped around in this term we use today called cultural competency. So it's not just one thing, but it's several things: race, ethnicity, identity, nationality, um, all of these, and customs, your cultural customs. So all of these are part of what we call cultural competency. And we're becoming more aware of it these days.
Well, is it that sometimes the thought strikes me that if you look at the what is it called, the East Rift Valley in Eastern Africa, that's where humankind was supposed to have emerged from that place. And then humankind, went everywhere. And that was a long story, 100,000 years ago or more. And so if you look at it from that point of view, we're all related. We're related to the people who emerged out of that valley, looking to the mutation that created the human being. And so we're all in the same boat. I mean, DNA wise, as a species, we're all in the same boat. And so, is that the solution to sort of put aside all of those differences you talked about? Or is it rather to appreciate them and learn them and deal with them on an egalitarian basis? Which one?
Well, Jay, I think there's a combination of things. You raised two good points. 99% of the genes, come from all of that, what you're talking about, where we came from as a species. So we have a commonality. The second thing, besides a commonality, are appreciating differences. And around the world, where you grew up, the environment you grew up in, your tastes, all of these things should be learned to be appreciated because nobody is going to be the same. And we talk about differences in people. And I think that we have to respect and look at, because America is built on different people, but we're individuals. That individuality in all of us encompasses many differences. And we should learn to appreciate the next individual and respect their beliefs and knowing that they're going to be different too. And I think that's important because if we understand ourselves and our fellow man, I think we can probably proceed towards important common goals. And I believe in making a stronger America by incorporating cultural competency.
Well, one thing that strikes me is that we are different. I mean, unless we're twins, our DNA is going to be different. Sometimes it'll be similar to other people, but always ultimately different. And some of us will be stronger, smarter, weaker, not as smart. Some of us will have, a vulnerability to certain diseases. I mean, we're all different, completely different. And if you are going to learn about those differences, you're going to learn that some people are smarter, some people are weaker, some people are vulnerable, some people aren't, what have you, because we're all different. So the question I put to you is, how do you set that aside? Or is that the wrong way to look at it? Perhaps we should look at it to say, your DNA lived in a certain place in the world, that you were in a community, a tribe, if you will, that developed certain cultural customs, certain priorities, certain ethics, certain contributions to humanity. And we should see you from that point of view. And we may see you as having benefits that we don't have, having strengths and weaknesses we don't have. But those are cultural rather than anatomical. They're cultural rather than DNA. I mean, how do we look at that?
Well, I agree, Jay. I think we have to look at every person as an individual, and every person we're not going to be the same, obviously. You and I won't look the same. We won't have the same characteristics. And maybe we don't have the same beliefs, but we should tolerate that because what we are, however, looking for is a common goal. For example, we all want a better life for our children. We want to get good health care for everyone. And it's important because if we take a look at culture competency, what they've done in healthcare, I think that area, they've moved it to a different level. They've been promoting culture competency in healthcare for many years. And it's important because the health of an individual, and you take all these individuals together in a community and a country, is important collectively. So again, that's a common goal. We want to have a good, healthy America because it's good for America. We are productive and we are much more efficient. And so culture competency, looking at a common goal, for example, in healthcare for everyone and, and understanding that everyone who walks through is going to be a little bit different than the other person because of religion, race, beliefs, culture, so forth. Like if you're a doctor and if somebody comes into the emergency room, you got to understand maybe there's certain beliefs and things that they have, okay, and they want to refuse treatment, and you have to work around it, understanding these differences. And I think that that's important.
Yeah, well, for sure. So what I hear you saying though is that it's if you want to take a reasonable, rational, elevated, modern approach to this, progressive approach, you you want to know all the points of culture. You want to educate yourself. You want to read and study, take classes, whatever. You want to study anthropology, psychology. You want to be aware of the groups and communities around you or at distance. And you want to deal with them, but to deal with them best, you should probably know who they are, the drivers, what's important, what the priorities for that culture, what their strengths and weaknesses are as a culture. So then, if you know, you can deal better. Now, I suppose you can also deal worse, but the idea is to deal better. You can take a high road on it. So, my question to you is how do you develop cultural competency? How do you learn about those cultures in communities other than yours? Go to school? What do you think?
Yes, Jay, I think you've hit at the point where it really needs to start from the school level. It needs to start in our schools where children at a young age really, and it should be a course that happens every year in school, in our curriculum, because learning about culture competencies, you have to learn about yourself first, and then you have to learn about the other communities that you're in. And importantly is it really starts with the teachers. I think there's a big debate. If you go on the internet, you have a lot of teachers are being dismissed for maybe talking about the George Floyd trial, uh, maybe not talking about it, maybe talking about things that are anti-Asian, okay? And it shows a lack of sensitivity, but there needs to be a really coordinated effort from the leadership to have a educational program, culture competency. And Jay, why is it so important now than ever? Because by 2027, the most important generation of America's future, the 20 to 27-year-olds in 2027, they will be they will be more than 50% non-white, non-Caucasian. And that means that these are people that have different cultures, different races, different ethnicities. And it's important that this is going to have to be a very productive member of our American society. Otherwise, we're in trouble.
What kind of trouble would that be?
Well, we are going to have more domestic strife. We're going to have laws and policies that may favor certain groups. No opportunities for developing careers. It becomes just a less productive society. And I think a lot of it also, well, not only in schools, but in the corporate place, in companies. There need to be a culture competency policies. And I'm not talking, Jay, about a lot of lip service where we have a manual that talks about culture policy. Maybe we have a kind of orientation for you in a book, and once a year talk about it. But you have to actively promote people in leadership positions. Okay, that will also be part of the new America, which are going to be comprised a lot of people who are going to be of different ethnic backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, and that's very important for a productive America. And a few years ago, McKinsey did a study of the U.S. and Canada and UK, and they did a survey of companies tracking their problems and success. And it was found out that companies in the top quartile in their studies that had incorporated culture competency were 3 times much more profitable than companies that didn't have culture competency programs.
So let's talk about the schools first. Okay, I'm going to make you, at least for the duration of this show, let's see, the superintendent of schools of the state of Hawaii. It's good to dwell on Hawaii because Hawaii is pretty much a success story on this. But what would you teach there in the schools? Would you what would you teach? Would you teach history? Would you teach anthropology? What would the course be like if you wanted to give everyone in the classroom cultural competence?
I think uh, for a class like that, I think you're looking at the lessons we see in America today, looking at the problems we have, such as a George Floyd. Okay, but what's important, first of all, is for the children in a school, because communities are different in different areas. They have to understand their own culture first. If you are in a district that has more Polynesians, understand your culture, and then you expose them to the other cultures in the communities around you. Okay, and I think it's very important that you hire teachers who are from that community who can also share that knowledge with them, and then bring in the leaders of the community to part of a program to try to develop culture competency, and giving them a knowledge of the history of the different groups, the ethnic groups, for example, in Hawaii. Why is it like it is? Because we have a very unique history, and we have different ethnic groups, and each have contributed to our into our community. I think it's important that we incorporate something like this as a start.
Well, as I said, Hawaii is a great example. I think we can agree that it's not only that people get along with other groups. It's not only that we're in what do you want to call it, a perfect world of relationships of various racial, ethnic, cultural groups, relative to other places anyway. It's that we have achieved that over a period of time where everybody learned about the other groups. And I give you the phenomenon of the plantations. Mixed, everybody mixed up. Everybody mixed up. Although they might have occupied different levels of jobs and seniority and management in the plantations. Some of those groups have been in the plantations for a long time. Others were newcomers and at the low end of the labor spectrum. Bottom line is they all got to know about the other groups. All the Chinese got to know the Japanese and vice versa, and the Filipinos, and for that matter, the Puerto Ricans at the turn of the 20th century. And all of the groups that were brought in by the plantation owners, Big Five, to staff the plantations. And they lived together, although they were separate, I suppose, at a bunk level. But the community of the plantation was everybody was together and doing largely the same work and shoulder to shoulder for a whole career, decades, a lifetime, intermarrying because that was what was available, actually. And everybody got to know the cultural background of the new entry into the family by way of marriage as well. So it began with contention on the plantations in the end of the 19th century, but by the time we got into I don't know the 1930s and 40s and like that, everybody knew each other, and it was great fun, and it was good humor. And although it was still separate camps, the fact is that that this knowledge of the other guy's culture really helped in bringing Hawaii together and making it what it is today. I submit to you that's where it all started, and it was a lucky break, at least looking back on it today. Do you agree?
I wholeheartedly agree, Jay, that that's a unique Hawaii experience where I think many places can learn from how this place, how we have working together. And I think one thing that important, drawing just what you said, is that we all have a shared experience, which is
Mm.
really important. We realize that we have a shared experience of the holidays and cultures and the food. For example,
Lest we
um,
forget the food. You're
food,
right. The food is
right?
very important.
Very
I
important. For
mean,
example,
and everybody partakes in the other guy's food. This is
everybody
really important.
partakes in the other side food. And the basic denominators in life is food. We learned we like malasadas, Portuguese donuts, right? We like lau lau, Hawaiian food. We like Japanese mochi, right? And we take customs from each other. We just don't eat steak, okay? We learn different cultures. But one of the interesting thing is that culture is starting to spill out, you know, little by little. For example, poke. Who would think poke now is all over the world? A lot of restaurants have poke. It comes from here, right? So we start to share, and people then start to say, "Oh, there's something we appreciate," and they start to understand that. And I think that's important, where we have to do that. What I'm really worried about, Jay, is the leadership coming up, like Marjorie Greene had her proposed America First caucus, which was basically saying we are going to cancel everything else out. And everything that we have to promote in this country is Anglo-Saxon culture. Okay. Which again, it goes contrary to where the demographics are heading in this country. We should learn and share the food, the holidays. All of this is important.
Yeah, one point about the food. I'm shifting to the mainland, okay? I'm shifting to the guys in California who eat sushi and are not Asian. Um, I think they're going to be progressive and tolerant, and that's where it starts, at least in some cases. And they say, let me because I'm progressive and tolerant, I think I'll try the food, and they like the food. So it starts from being open-minded, okay? Um, and that has happened. That's a phenomenon that has already taken root, at least in California. Um, and of course, it took root in Hawaii 100 years ago. But then you have people who are not necessarily culturally aware, but they're food aware, and they're gourmand. And they try the sushi without having any particular progressive thoughts in their mind. and they like the sushi. And so it goes from there. And you start with the food and you say, this is not a bad culture. I'm going to enjoy this culture. I think that's a lesser phenomenon than the original phenomenon where you know the culture first and then you try the food. The food is an important part. Going to the mainland, and looking at the mainland in general, and California is an exception. Looking at, and maybe New York City is an exception too. You find that people are ignorant about cross-cultural issues. They do not have education or any leadership that will show them that it's important to live in this country. You have to know about cultures and accept cultures and respect cultures, all that. And that's a problem because they don't have the benefit of the plantation experience. They don't have the benefit of the food experience in most cases. They just start out on the wrong foot by virtue of their silo communities, their supremacist views that have been carried in their communities and in their families for a long time. And we see that Trump has exacerbated that. He's found it and he's widened the gap. So my question to you then is, forget about the Department of Education of the state of Hawaii. Let's talk about the Secretary of Education of the United States. And I make you the secretary just for the balance of this show, okay? You have to work fast. So what do you do? What do you do to bring people together and have them understand, learn about, appreciate, enjoy the other cultures that are not theirs?
Well, Jay, I think it's really important, going back to the schools again. And it's really important that there should be a teacher standard in having a certain accreditation in cultural competency. And I think it's important what you point out because many of the communities in America have very little or no exposure to other different cultures, races, ethnicities. And it's in these areas, in these parts of America, Middle America, where you're having a lack of cultural competency. I think you need more of that. I really think it's education. It starts from a really young age. And one thing is, as you know, Jay, I've been in China for a number of years, and what I saw, what they did was very interesting. For the last 35 years, they brought in to become more global and more culturally aware the mandatory learning of language, English language. Now they start from first grade all the way up to high school. And today, if you are taking their high school exam to get into a prestigious university, you have to score well in the English part of the exam. It's the same weight given to math and science. That's how important English is. So many of them have studied American culture, many of because of their to achieve a high level of English. And so that's in one sense why I think in China they're much more globally competitive. They understand the language of business English for many years. They can go out and negotiate, and they try to think how Americans think. And I think that's one of the reasons why globally they've become a little more effective. They beat out Japan at being number 2 in the world because the Japanese are not global. They don't learn a second language like English. So another part of it is through our schools to have children start to learn a second language. It's one of the ways in which your mind opens up. Becomes broader. A second language. We used to have that, and it used to be a focus where all the languages were European language, French and Spanish and German. I think you need to get other languages, Asian languages, like Mandarin. I think it's important.
I think that's a really important point. If you can learn the language, you immediately have an affinity for the culture. When I was in school, in junior high school and high school, I studied French, and I have a special connection. I understand the culture, I understand what France is like, although what it was like then and what it's like now, it would be a little different. But I'd like to go to your point about the Chinese and their willingness to train kids in other languages, like for example English, and then to appreciate other cultures. I think that learning English in China is more like being ready, prepared for global competition. If they want to come and attend American universities, if they want to do business with American companies, they better learn English. And that's a very wise and strategic move that goes way back to Deng Xiaoping, at least. Yeah. And so that one it's not the same thing as being progressive and understanding and culturally open, but it is cultural awareness for sure. And maybe a lot of people in China who studied English and who are studying English today can be more sympathetic, with English-speaking countries because they can understand them and their culture better. But what I get in China, and this is really a very important question we should discuss, is that the Chinese want the Tibetans to be Chinese. They want them to fall in line. To some extent, Mongolia, Outer Mongolia, and of course, they want the Hong Kongers to be Chinese, mainland Chinese. And they'd love to have Taiwan do that too, but that's not immediately available. And finally, the moment of today is we got to talk about Xinjiang, about how they're trying to make the Chinese Muslims into Chinese, not Muslims. And arguably, they're taking these draconian steps against them and putting them in quote unquote retraining camps or worse. That's all intended, arguably, I don't know if I agree, but they say it's intended to make everyone in China Chinese and fall within the China culture and the China political system and all that. It's really out of 1984, isn't it? And so my question to you is, what do we prefer? Do we prefer a China or an America that is all blended to one Chinese or American culture? Or do we want to have the respect of the separation, the preservation of the contributing cultures that were here before? We still have that to some degree in the United States, and as you say, that looks like we'll preserve that because that's the better way, according to our morality. But what about the system in China, where the government wants everybody to fall in line and to adopt the Chinese culture, the Chinese system, the Chinese political view of things? Is that the better way?
Well, Jay, I'm really not an authority to discuss that, but um, I think it's somewhere in between what we have and what they have. It's somewhere in between that line, okay? And I think that the important point, I think, is that China is just a very different country because it has a different set of problems. And the problems is, as I largely see it, it's still parts of the country are still economically depressed. And there is a third world element. Once you leave the cities, it's very different. And I think that at least from my being there, the most important thing in people's mind is do you want personal freedom or economic freedom? And that's a big difference, a very big difference that we fail to understand as Americans, because in America, we're schooled on personal freedom. We're schooled on a different kind of freedom. In China and Asian countries, wherever you go, it's about economic freedom. That's why a lot of them are driven by money because they didn't have it. So I think it's a timeline progression. Maybe it's going to happen for them to be more like us, but it's not going to go right away. It's not going to happen right away. And again, there are voices on both sides, and I understand the voices. And maybe the voices that are critical are good to move it in a direction. Again, but I think that's the difference between the divide. It's economic freedom versus personal
Mm,
freedom. And if you look at Hong Kong, my friends who are 40s, 50s, who have businesses, are complaining that the kids spoiled it for them. Okay. They're looking at economic freedom because they were telling me the kids there never worked in their life. The kids that were demonstrating never had a job. The kids that demonstrated don't have to bring money to buy food, pay for health care. So they had a unique position that Hong Kong could have kept the same way if you look at economic freedom. And I think some of my in the China side, the youth are saying, what are they protesting about? Don't they want to have money to travel to build to get money? And maybe the problem is because In Hong Kong, it's been a structured society where either you have money or you don't, you know? And so the vehicle was to come on personal freedom. But that was a complaint I was hearing from my friends who had jobs and
Mm.
businesses that it disrupted everything they had. Now it's going to be different because now China moves in completely, 100%. Before it wasn't a 100% move. And being on that side of the world, you saw the demonstrations, 300, 400,000, maybe. It really was disrupted. All my friends, lawyer friends and colleagues in Hong Kong said it really disrupted everything, you know. So again, there are debates on both sides.
Well, I think we have to recognize that this whole thing about cultural competency is on a fundamental underpinning of the change in culture. Cultures are not static; they change. And when you put a lot of cultures together in a given boiling pot, then you get a new culture based on all the contributing cultures. And I suggest that in America, we are developing, and you can see it happening, an American culture, aren't we? Well, that's what we're doing. And I think the basic principle here is that you have to see all humanity as related out of the East Rift Valley. I see you. I should see you as my relative, Russell. But obviously it hasn't been. It has been many, many millennia since our forefathers knew each other, but we are related. And the second point is we need to be moral and decent, and we need to respect, all of those cultures that are contributing to our global culture. And I hope that happens soon. And that's the right direction. The wrong direction is to go into silos. Okay, closing comment, Russell. What do you want to leave people with this show?
Well, Jay, I want to leave the show is that culture competency, you shouldn't be afraid of it because we're going through change, as you say, Jay. We're redefining who we are as Americans. The demographic shifts are happening, whether you like it or not. So we need to try to reach out and figure who we are and respect other groups. That's all it boils down to, Jay. You
Yeah, we have
respect
other
your,
fish to fry, don't we?
that's right.
We're in this together.
We're
We
in
have
this
to deal
together.
with existential threats like COVID, like climate change, and we can do that better if we're collectively, together on things. And if we don't, if we have culture wars, as they say in the Republican Party, we're not attending to the right priorities, and we're putting everyone at risk. Russell Leu, I always enjoy these discussions. Thank you very much, Russell. I look forward to our next talk show 2 weeks from now.
Yes, thank you very much, Jay. Thank you very much.
Aloha.